Hello and welcome to the Writing Lounge. This is a re-recording of a live session earlier this week. The sound did not work on that recording, so I'm just doing a demo recording for your convenience. Welcome to the Writing Lounge. For those of you who have been here before, you know that each time we meet, we focus on one aspect of writing and communication. And we just try to come up with a few strategies that will help as you move forward. We have plenty of time for questions afterwards. And as always, you can request the slides that I'm using and the recording. Okay, so here we go. Tonight, focusing on presentation slide design. And if you look at these questions, I want you to think of which ones ring true to you. My slides are usually notes of what I say in my presentation. Number two, I like to get all my data on my slides so the audience can see everything. I've never really thought much about designing slides. I don't have time to design slides. It's the info and data that matters anyway. And number five, I've seen amazing slides, but I don't know how to create them. I imagine all of you have thought of these at least once in your slide design experience. And what we're going to work on are ways to combat these thoughts, okay? Because these are all thoughts that keep you from having effective slide design. We'll come up with some strategies and some examples, and we'll see what we can do by the end. So I'm going to focus first on some design concepts. Next, we're actually going to focus on some storytelling techniques that will make your slides and your presentation just all that more captivating for your audience. We'll talk about how to arrange items on a slide, backgrounds and what for you and not doing for you, colors, how to use color in a slide, a color palette, how to use text and also how to reduce text on your slides. We'll talk about images, how to display data, and also how and when to use movement on slides. So these are the topics we're going to be covering. I should be talking for about half an hour, and we'll see what we can get to. As always, email me, find me on LinkedIn, and my contact information is at the end of this webinar, and I'm happy to talk to you about moving forward. Let's start with some guiding concepts for slide design. Think about what your slides are for. When you're doing slides, are you just automatically doing them because that's what a presentation is these days? Please remember, we have been doing presentations for thousands of years. We've only had slides for 30. So we shouldn't just automatically go to slides, make our slides, get them up there. About the choices we're making, particularly who these slides are for. We like to say they're for our audience, but in so many ways, we construct them to help us as presenters. And that's where a lot of things go wrong. We need to remember that slides are not for us. They're for our audience, and everything is about the audience experience. So that's how I'm going to move forward here. I'd like you to think of an idea when you're making slides. Every slide tries to communicate an idea for your audience to understand. You're trying to have them experience something to understand your message. And in order for them to do that, each slide has to do some of that work. Each slide is an expression of an idea in your presentation. It is not just a list of notes and information and data. What is the idea? What are the possibilities encapsulated in that idea? What are the obstacles? What are the limits? These are all things that have to be considered when you're trying to communicate an idea. Oh, and by the way, about your audience, please remember two things. Number one, they can listen to you or they can read their slides. They can't do both. So if your audience members are spending all their time reading words on your slide, they're not listening to you. And in conjunction with that, please remember that a great slide never won a room over, never secured a pitch, never got a proposal accepted. But a bad deck, bad slide deck, can very easily lose one. It's all about you communicating your message to your audience. The audience loses sight of, they lose sight of your message. So please remember, don't fill your slides with so many words that nobody's listening to you. And always remember that a lousy deck can make your audience lose interest very quickly. When you are designing decks, there's all sorts of options. Obviously, there's PowerPoint. In fact, we say PowerPoint when slides. And I imagine most of you have some experience with PowerPoint. I've built these slides in PowerPoint. It's perfectly fine. And there's plenty to do with PowerPoint. It's a very powerful application. I also am a big fan of Canva. And if you're really trying to work on design, Canva can be really helpful for you because it works with a lot of design principles to help you achieve those design principles. And that third logo, that's actually Prezi. And that's a really good option when you have to get everything on one screen, and then you have to zoom in and out of information on that screen. Prezi allows for a kind of built-in narrative construction, built-in story, if you will, that allows everything to be in one space. This is particularly useful. Prezi is useful if you're in an organization that really requires you get one slide and that's all you can focus on, and you got to get all the information on that one slide, and that goes against all design principles. So Prezi gives you a kind of backdoor way of helping you accommodate that organizational requirement. All three are great. There's many more as well. Use whatever application is going to work for you. These are three I find particularly useful. Book, I can't recommend it enough. It is absolutely fantastic. It's by Nancy Duarte, who is absolutely at the forefront of business presentation work. She has been for years. Her company has. This is an absolutely great book. Get it if you can. Really. What I love the most about it is that she provides essential elements for people who are really starting out with trying to design slides. She always links it to the purpose and the structure of your presentation, but there's plenty of information there. If you really want to deep dive into slide design, there's plenty of information in Slideology for you to do that. It's a great all-around book. Yeah, I've listed it in the resources at the end of this presentation, as well as many others. I use this book a lot. Many of the ideas presented here come from Duarte, and I'll mention that along the way. All right, let's start with story matters. And we might think that that's just not that important. We're just trying to design slides. We're just trying to build slides for a presentation. Why do I have to think about story? My answer to that is, why would you not use elements that will help captivate your audience? And story techniques do that. I know when I'm making presentations, I want to find everything that's going to help me. And story can do a lot of heavy lifting for you in that department. Think about what good stories have. All right, look at that pathway. And there's a woman at the end of that pathway, and I kind of want to know where she's going, what's on her mind, where she's come from, journey, right? And that's what stories have. Stories have a journey. And if you are pitching a proposal, if you are trying to convince people that your project is the one to adopt, if you are trying to change a organization, if you're trying to get people on board, if you can invoke notions of journey, you're inviting people to join you. Who are we? Where are we? Where are we going to go? How are we going to get there? These are questions your presentation can help to answer, and people will be much more likely to join you along the way if you can invoke these kinds of terms. Have heroes and villains. Now, I'm not saying you need to bring a villain into your story here and your presentation, but if you can think of who should we be rooting for and how are you going to build that into your slides and into your presentation? That sense of empathy, compassion, ethos. Where's the obstacle? What's getting in the way? It doesn't have to be a person, but something's going to get in the way. How can you think about incorporating communicating that in your presentation? All good stories have a conflict. And you know what? Most organizations have conflicts. And when you're trying to convey your proposal, your pitch, and you're implementing a storytelling technique, you want to bring that conflict in. You want to identify it, identify the contrast in perspectives, identify the stakeholders and what's important for people. Finally, stories have surprises. That's an exciting part of the story. So there, in this creating for your audience, an unexpected turn. Where is it? Why is it there? Can you talk about it? Can you draw the audience attention to it and make it work for you? These four little elements of story can be utterly captivating for your audience. You can pull them in ways that simply just generating slides with information is not going to do. So I invite you to think about your presentation and your slide development as a story. In that sense, at the beginning, try to storyboard, or actually after you've developed your talk, because you should only really work on your slides after your talk is developed. Try to storyboard a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that sounds simple, but it's not. So many times we simply build slides until we're done getting all the information on them. And then there's some, that's not a story, that's not captivating, that's just a grocery list. Think about a beginning, what would be there? Think about a middle. Think about an end. Usually in the beginning, lots of things are introduced, and right in the beginning and the middle, some sort of basic conflict is introduced. And then in an end, we'll resolve that conflict in some way. Just try to think about it that way. Think about your slides in terms of chapters or sections, even acts, if that's the metaphor you want to use. But don't just think of it as, I have 42 slides, because nobody's going to be interested in that at all. People should know where they are in the story, especially if you have a talk that's going to go on for maybe more than 10 or 15 minutes. People can't remember where they are in a story after just a few minutes. So you'll notice what I've done is I have the little tabs on the side that tell us which chapter we're in this webinar, in this slide deck. So think about that. People need to know where they are, because if you don't know where you are, you stop paying attention. And if people stop paying attention, you might as well stop your presentation because it's done. Each slide should tell a tiny story. I learned this as I was teaching a consultancy course. And I was trying to tell the teams that you don't want to overload your slides with a bunch of text, right? These aren't books for people to read. These aren't documents. If you have a document, email people a document. Okay. Slide development during a presentation should be much more concise and shouldn't be full of text everywhere. But what would happen is when we had students do a practice run, I noticed that their slides were just a couple of random words or a couple of random pictures with no description. I had no idea what the slide meant. As an audience member, I had no idea what it was doing there. So it didn't tell a tiny story. It was served as just quick note for the presenter to glance at. And there they are. In other words, that slide was not for the audience. That slide was for the presenter to jog their memory. So think of a slide as a very tiny story. That's what an idea is, right? An idea is a tiny story that has its own little tiny beginning, middle, and end. Like I've done here, you'll notice, in fact, I try to do it in all my slides. You have a stack of books that reminds me of story. And then I have the text to provide you with a directive. Each slide should tell a tiny story. And then I have a contrast item that really gets you to focus on it. It's a tiny story. It's not a big, long story with lots of words. Basically, people need to know who's supposed to do what on every slide. Each slide should tell a tiny story. Now let's talk about arranging elements on a slide. Let's get down to the workmanship of this. One idea per slide. One idea per slide. All those slides with 5, 10 ideas on them, they're terrible. Because what happens, the audience starts reading through all the ideas, and if they're reading through all the ideas, no matter how they're visualized in terms of numbers, in terms of text, in terms of pictures and text, if they're paying attention to the slide, they're not paying attention to you. Give an idea its own space. That way, your audience can actually consider it. Yeah, people should get your slide in 3 seconds or 4 seconds. The idea is they should get your slide quickly because the faster they get a sense of your slide, the faster they're starting to pay attention to what you have to say, right? Your slides are always going to win, especially if they're captivating. So make sure people get them quickly so they can start looking to you for explanation of that idea generated and how that idea developed. Of course, there are exceptions to this. Of course there are. But please don't make it common practice for someone to take a minute and a half to get through your slide. When you're building slides, make use of contrast to guide people to your point. Because even if there's one idea on a slide, that idea has components to it. It's not just a word to jog your memory. Remember, it's a tiny story. So you have to guide people to what you want them to see when in your tiny story. And you can use contrast to do that. For example, here on the left-hand side. By the way, the Duarte book goes into great detail on this and really gets you thinking about all sorts of stuff. These are just some essential elements. So you can very easily look at the first column. Your eye is drawn to that larger circle because it's different from the others. Remember the Sesame Street game? One of these things is not like the other. That's the concept here. Right? I'm drawn to the larger circle because it's bigger than the others. In the second column from the left, I'm drawn to the triangle because the shape is different. So my eye is guided there. In the middle column, I used shade to contrast. So my eye is drawn to that lighter colored circle, and if that's where you want people to look, you can use shade to create direction. In the fourth column from the left, color is used to create contrast. And I tend to use this one a lot. as you can see, I've used color to contrast this slide, and I've done it on many others. And it has to be a punch color that kind of really draws your attention. And you'll notice that from the other circles, that bright orange, my eye is drawn to it. That's what I'm looking at. And finally, in that fifth column, you see location is used. If everything's in alignment and something's out of alignment, people are going to be drawn to that thing that's out of alignment. I tend not to use this because I like my elements aligned, but it's very, very effective because I'm immediately drawn to that circle. So think about contrast in terms of size, shape, shade, color, and location to guide people's eyes to your point. You also want to think about how people's eyes are moving on your slide. Now, we're working in English right now. English is a language that moves from left to right and usually down the page. So I've created boxes here that guide people's eyes in those directions, that mimic those directions. So create flow for reader's eyes, goes left to right and down the page. Now, if I had flipped flow and for readers, those boxes, I probably would have confused people because I would have wanted them to go down the column, back up to the top, and then down again. And that's just not an instinctual or trained movement when we're working in English or a Latinate language. This one might seem obvious. Hierarchy builds relationships. And please remember, that's in slides, not life. But I can't tell you how many times I see slides where a title is smaller than the body text that comes after it, and that you're just giving the wrong signals about importance. The biggest font is going to be the most important one. The least important is going to be the smallest font. Please remember that when you're building your slides, you're building the words on your slides. Use that hierarchy to help build a relationship and to help signal to your audience what's more important. When you're bringing in photography, try to use, actually, not even when you're bringing in photography, certainly when you're bringing in photography, but when you're composing a slide, think of its entire background and use a grid system. Figure out how to place elements on that slide and build your layers. For example, you see the dotted lines, right? That's a 3x3 grid. Just use the rule of thirds, which we'll talk about. But it can be 4x4, it can be 5x5. You think of those columns and grids, and you think about putting things in those boxes. Or in this case, at the intersection of those boxes. So you'll see where the dotted lines intersect. That's the elements in this slide. You never want to really, unless it's for a specific reason, you never want to just throw a picture in the middle of your slide and just have things willy-nilly around it. You kind of want to look at where those intersecting lines are and put stuff there. For example, I've used a photograph as a background. And you'll notice in the top left intersection, that's where the man's head is. Bottom left intersection, that's where his shoulder is. The bottom right intersection, that's where the mic is. Now in the top right intersection, there was nothing, so that was a really great place to put my little story. Use a grid system to compose a slide. Right. Now balance the composition. You can put stuff generally, it's just a basic photography principle. You see it when you're editing a photo on your phone, it'll come up with this grid system. You want stuff along the lines, or you want stuff at the intersection of the lines, and that will be kind to people's eyes, and it creates a nice composition. Now here I'm going exactly against what I just told you, right? I have one little item right in the middle, but it was intentional. I am embracing space here because what I want to do is draw you as an audience to this simple, tiny little story right here. And that's all that matters. And I really am emphasizing that by putting a lot of blank space on the slide. It's purposeful though. I want to emphasize space and how it can work for you, so I'm using it in this slide. Let's move on to backgrounds, colors, and text. Backgrounds, they're a surface, like a tabletop that you're sitting at dinner, like a counter. And you need to be consistent and purposeful with your choices there. So often I see slides that have these busy template choices because you're just picking them out of PowerPoint. It's like, oh, I really like those greens, and I like, and it takes up a third of the slide, and that just is a cluttered surface. It's not doing anything for you. Maybe you like green, but all it's doing is confusing the reader, taking up surface where you could have valuable information. It's not contributing to your idea. It's just completely and utterly arbitrary. So please make sure when you are choosing a background, for example, I never use a template. I just build my background. And I try to build that background to help communicate the idea. Please don't choose templates arbitrarily. And keep your surface clean. Don't clutter it. Choose a color palette. A lot of you are probably limited by your organization's colors and logos. That's fine. So am I. I'm using Redlands colors. You'll notice the burgundy, the maroon, the white, the gray, and then the black or the dark gray, the charcoal gray. Those are Redlands colors. There's a little black there. I may have tried to zhuzh it up a little here in the palette choice, but make it work. And I'm not using 95 colors in a presentation. I'm limiting myself to pretty much those 4 colors, and in this case, a little pop color for contrast. And rarely do I even use the black. I'm really just using the maroon, the white, and the gray, and then the pop color. If you have over 4 colors, if you have over 4 colors in your palette, you're confusing the reader. Okay, so choose your color palette and stick to it. Get comfortable with the color wheel, right? Know that purple and yellow are complementary colors. Know that red and green are complementary colors. They contrast nicely and they complement each other. I'm not asking you to become a big designer. I am no designer. I have a 4-year-old Dell and I use PowerPoint. But if you can just get some comfort with that color wheel, you're going to do yourself a lot of service. Again, the Duarte book goes into great detail about color possibilities, but I just want to present here those basics. Choose fonts that eyes like. Remember, we are looking at screens a lot these days, and we're going to be looking at them more and more and more. Big fonts, please, especially when we're looking at stuff on our phones, right? People need to be able to read stuff. And you want to make sure your font is big enough. If you're sitting there in 12 and 14-point font, no one can see your work. And if no one can see your work, no one's listening. Banish your bullet points. You don't need bullet points. There's not a single bullet point in this slide deck. Now, I'm not saying never ever use a bullet point, but think about how you can articulate your idea without simply listing a bunch of bullet points. Because you know what? Bullet points are not for your audience. They're for you as a presenter. So make your notes with your bullet points if you need to. Try to design your slides in a way that conveys an idea with more energy, more and more urgency than a list of bullet points. All right, I think our final section, uh, near our final section, images and movement. Photography. If you're using clip art, just stop it. It's not 1995. Okay? Embrace photography. Unsplash is a great resource. It's all high resolution photographs. Most of the photos here that I've used are from Unsplash, except the ones that are my own that I've made through photography. It is all public domain. You can use them. You're not infringing on anybody's copyright, and they're all high resolution, wonderful photographs. Get friendly with icons. Okay, you can go to icon filter, and then you can get all sorts of icons, and it's a great really great way to reduce the number of words on your slides is to make use of icons. Icons, what can you say in an icon that can eliminate some words for you? Great opportunity. Then for your own good interest here, build a photo and icon library. You find a photo that you've liked and you've used, you're downloading it, just build a library with some folders. Oh, here are photos that have to do with working at the office. Here are photos that have to do with outside views. Just build those libraries so that they're easy to access later and you don't have to go looking for stuff. And then your slide design becomes pretty quick if you can do that. Animate only if there's a reason to do so. Random animation is just confusing for your reader. Here are some reasons you might animate. When you indicate the change in relationship between elements or processes, that's fine. That's a great way. You can make something bigger, larger, move it, do all that kind of stuff to just signal that to your audience that there's a change. Maybe you want them to look a certain way. A lot of times you can create a panorama using push left, push right, or push left, push right, push up, down, and you can take people along your journey. It's a way to create a journey element in your slide design. So if you want to signal direction, sometimes animation is helpful. If you want to signal a transition in time or growth, again, it's kind of like change in relationship, but it's a specific time in relationship. That's a great opportunity. You'll notice one thing I've done is I've used the transition element to make this feel, I use the page turn one because as I'm thinking about slide design, when I think about design, for some reason I think about coffee table books. Those big, beautiful coffee table books and the big pages just move over, and that's where I think of fantastic design and photography. So I wanted to echo that feeling. So I've chosen that transition. Most of the time I don't choose a transition, but I wanted that effect for this one. And I always use it, particularly in webinar mode, I always use animation to control eye movement. I don't want to have 150 slides. I want to get this into a small PDF that I can send to you. So what to do then is as I'm talking, reveal the information in a time way so that you're not spending all your time on looking at the slide and you're looking at what you need to look at and then you can listen to me. So I use controlling eye movement a lot. Displaying data, I know you're working on this. Here's one recommendation. Instead of putting all the data on the screen, try when you can to put only the takeaway on the screen. Use infographics. Here, I've just made a little one here. 45% of the US workforce will use co-working spaces by 2025. I just made that up, but it's a takeaway. And if people can get your takeaway quickly, they're going to listen to how you got there. And then they're listening to you again. Okay? If you throw all the data up there, no one's going to pay attention to you, and no one's even going to pay attention to the takeaway you want them to pay attention to. Use the right tool. If you're going to use a pie chart, use it for a reason. I just did a couple of examples here. A pie chart will help emphasize large differences. Okay, it's not going to help you if that pie was divided into 8 slices. That's not a helpful chart. That's not a good tool. It doesn't help the reader see anything. But right now in that pie chart, I can see I'm drawn to that gold color, that yellow gold color, because it's significantly bigger than all the other slices of the pie. And so if, as a presenter, what I want to talk about, then that pie chart is pretty good. On the other side, bar charts can probably show more precision. Above all, you need to think about tool and is it the right tool for the job. You can't just say, hey, I like pie chart, that's what I use, or I like line charts, so that's what I use. You have to have a reason and you have to know what they're best used for. Also, one thing right down here, notice mine are in 2D. I'm not saying don't use 3D, but I'm saying if you have a reason to use 3D, use it. A lot of mapping work needs that 3D to really show stuff. But if you can't articulate why you're choosing 3D, if you don't know why you're using it, nobody else does, and it's just confusing. So stick to 2D. Okay, 3D only when you have a reason to do so. And this is a formula from the Duarte book. It's brilliant. You need to think of, anytime you're using a chart, think of it this way. There's a background. So in the sales chart, there's the 2024, there's a grid, right? That's your axes. Then there's the data you want to put on that background. And then, I think we forget this a lot, there's the data you want to emphasize. Think about how you're going to draw people's eyes to that. And only when you can fill in those 3 columns do you get a good result. Background plus data plus emphasis. Please don't forget that emphasis element. And here's an example of how you use that emphasis element. You want to guide your audience's eyes to your point. So I don't care whether you're using a bar chart, a line chart, a table, or a pie chart. You need to tell people what to look at, and you need to tell them visually. You can't just say, oh, look in Q3, because no, they're not going to do it. They're going to look in Q4. Guide them with contrast to your point. You'll notice in each of these examples, I've used orange as that contrast color that draws the audience's eyes. So think about that as you're building your charts. You have to show people what you want them to look at. And you have to not only say it, but you have to show it. And that brings us to the end of this webinar. We've worked on some design concepts, story, we've worked on arranging items, background, colors, text, images, movement, and data. The resources I have for you and I recommend very highly, of course, is Nancy Duarte's Slideology. Please get that book. For presentations in general, for great recommendations about how to build entire presentations, not just slides, the HBR Guide to Presentations from Duarte is a great book, easy read, takes about an hour to read, and just so much information in it. Gar Reynolds' Presentation Zen is a canonical text. It's a little older now, but the concepts and the design principles are as contemporary as ever, and he's just really, really well known in design circles. If you're working a lot with data, I highly recommend the Storytelling with Data book, because again, data never won a room. How you talk about that data convinces people of points. So that's a great book for how to bring storytelling in with data. And if you are really into building charts and working with data visualization, that Good Charts is a fantastic book. It is very, very complex. It really deep dives in, and it's probably not good as a beginner text, but if this is your field and this is something you really want to become excellent at, get Good Charts. Absolutely fantastic. Hey, here's some information about the Writing Lounge. On June 25th, we'll have a conducting research through Armacost Library session. We will have, moving forward, 2 sessions a month in the Writing Lounge. Anyone is welcome. There's no registration. There's no cost. It is really here as a resource, whether you're a student, alum, guest, faculty. Everyone's welcome to the Writing Lounge. Follow me on LinkedIn, or you can follow the School of Business Facebook. If you're a current student, there's advertising, there's promotion of the Writing Lounge in the Bulldog Business Brief. And or you can just email me to find out when the next one is. We always meet right here at redlands.webex.com, meet Allison Freiberg, and I hope to see you soon at one of our events. Please contact me if you have any questions, and thank you.